Hi everyone, a drum-playing gorilla advertising chocolate bars here, with Rhyme Signatures, the nerdiest music review this side of thoroughly confusing the British public and opening the gateway to eyebrow-based content during commercial breaks. And today we are going to be doing a review of the new eMolecule album, The Architect. We've all, almost certainly at some point in our lives, had to live with the fact that we will inevitably have the shadow of our parents' successes looming over us like an uncomfortable shroud. Most of us, however, do not have one of the most famous, successful and beloved progressive rock musicians of all time as a father figure. Simon Collins, son of Phil, yes, that Phil, comes as such from a somewhat unenviable position. His namesake's certain to draw comparisons and parallels to his father's considerable talent and legacy. However, this really shouldn't be the case, as Simon is an extremely talented musician in his own right, and has carved out his own personality and niche throughout the musical landscape, managing to sound equal parts familiar to his old man, but distinctly himself, with a style that I can only imagine many others would look up to and seek to emulate. Like so many of my peers, my first exposure to Collins as a musician was via the 2013 album By Sound of Contact, Dimensionaut, which saw Collins hooking up with Matt Dorsey, Dave Kersner and Kelly Nordstrom to create what can easily be described as one of the best examples of modern prog rock I've heard in quite some time. I absolutely loved this album, and I still listen to it semi-regularly. It was perhaps a little bit overlong, but it was a brilliantly put together slice of early 2010s prog, and I would honestly recommend it to anyone. Sadly, the band only seemed to have it in them to put out one album under the name Sound of Contact, and Simon appeared to disappear from the progressive radar, until now, as he has emerged, with fellow former Sound of Contact bandmate Kelly Nordstrom, to bring us a brand new project, eMolecule. Now, I just want to preempt this review with one very clear, distinct and important fact. This is not Sound of Contact Part 2. This is very much its own thing, separate and distinct from Sound of Contact, and you should not expect this to be in any way similar to that album. To do so would honestly be setting yourself up for, I don't want to say disappointment, but it would certainly be setting yourself up for misaligned expectations. The first point to address is that this is a two-man show. Collins and Nordstrom handle everything between them. Guitars, keys, drums, programming, vocals, everything. As such, this does feel a little bit more of a personal project than Sound of Contact did with its fully formed quartet. This is also a much darker, more sinister and more metallic-tinged piece of work. There's very little in the way of classic prog stylings, instead favouring a much more crunchy, dystopian and moody atmospheric feeling to the whole sound of the record. In fact, if I had to pigeonhole this into a comparison with existing projects, I would quite comfortably call this In Absentia Porcupine Tree meets Milliontown Frost. And on paper, that certainly sounds like it's going to be a pretty fabulous time, especially for me. But how does this record hold up? Has the marriage of Collins and Nordstrom hit gold twice? Or is this a pairing that has soured, leaving a bitter-tasting pill and a sound lost to time? I am quite pleased to say that it seems, at least from the evidence we have thus far, that these two put together is a formula that has so far produced nothing but excellent music. eMolecule is a fascinating, varied, perhaps a little bit too lengthy project that is honestly more than worth your time and investment. The album starts off strongly with a long-form build-up with the namesake track of eMolecule, and it certainly manages to set the tone perfectly for precisely what this project is looking to achieve. It's a slow, pondering, methodical treatise full of swirling electronic instrumentation, dirge-like dystopian vocals, and atmosphere thick enough to cut with a sharp spoon. It manages to feel a lot shorter than its nearly 11-minute runtime, and despite the repetition in places, it never really gets boring or overstays its welcome. This sets a really great first impression, and it did leave me wanting to explore the rest of the record in earnest. Collins' vocals are particularly good throughout, never quite verging on being an imitation of his father's, but with some unmistakable accenting that marks his heritage. It's a distinctive tone, and the delivery on this record fits the established mood incredibly well. This is, after all, not a record of hope, joy or frivolity. This is a distinctly darker album, with cynicism and moodiness at the centre of almost everything on it. We are treated to a certain degree of pop sensibilities though, as there are numerous tracks on The Architect where a strong melody and catchy hook is at the forefront of the music. Songs like Beyond Belief, Prison Planet and My You really show off these chops and make for some very addictive listening with some fantastic earwormy choruses. The instrumentation remains distinctly prog though, and there's no shortage of experimentation and off-kilter passages to really remind you of the pedigree behind the album. As I mentioned earlier, I do get a really Porcupine Tree feel from the guitars and the drums, and a really Frost feeling from the electronic aspects. It's honestly a great marriage of styles and ensures that the record rarely feels one note or tedious. There's a significant amount of stylistic and tonal shifting throughout, but it's all under the umbrella of the dank and sinister theming of the album's concept. It is this theming, though, that is simultaneously one of the album's greatest strengths and one of its most significant weaknesses. The Architect is a pretty dizzying 70 minutes long. Not normally an issue for seasoned prog veterans, of course, but you will find yourself craving some levity from the constant "the world is terrible and everything is awful" lyrical messages and cyberpunk-styled musical batterings. It does work very well for ensuring that the album is thematically consistent, but without brief moments of stepping off the gas. The Architect can at times feel like a marathon to endure, rather than a sprint to enjoy. Now, I know I'm a fine one to talk about an album being too dark and too long, especially when 2021 saw me lauding praise upon Iosa Naunkane's era as one of the best records of the year. That's basically the hour-all equivalent of being waterboarded for nearly 2 hours. But I think a lot of it can be brought down to expectations and how these are met or not met. I came to The Architect, as many will do, from the angle of what we know about Collins and Nordstrom working together, that of Sound of Contact, and this is precisely why I want to make sure to warn you all before listening to this album. This is decidedly not that project, and it is vital that you understand that. This is 100% a record that needs context and prior knowledge of what to expect before you should listen to it. I mean, I've seen a lot of people walking away from this one just because they saw who was involved, expected one thing, and got something completely different. Now, don't get me wrong here, it is absolutely okay to not enjoy this album for it not meeting any expectations that you might have had, don't get me wrong, but knowing that this is a kind of progressive, industrial, electronica metal-y album with darker themes, lyrics, and even some growled vocals will really help you to appreciate it a lot more for what it is, rather than what you might have been hoping it to be. Now, I definitely had a good time with this album, but only after the bugbear of expectation was vanquished, and I could appreciate it for what it really was. My only other sort of gripe, I suppose, with the record was that some of the lyrics are a little bit on the nose, and it seems to be kind of the norm for a lot of bands lately. You know, the whole technology is evil, the world isn't the same post-COVID, Big Brother is always watching you, These are incredibly touchy subjects, and so few bands deal with it gracefully, often wielding an extremely heavy-handed message that they gleefully bludgeon the listener with all the airs and graces of a rhinoceros in heat. These lyrical themes and concepts can work, but a certain degree of subtlety is needed if they are to land effectively. There were more than a few times on this album where I rolled my eyes so hard at some of the lyrics that I could basically see the inside of my own head. That being said, though, Collins' vocals really are fantastic on The Architect, and, you know, I could just happily listen to him sing me the contents of a phone book if he was up for it. So, it certainly makes the occasional cringe of the subject matter a lot more pleasurable to sit through. But ultimately what makes this album stand out, what makes me keep coming back to it, is just how creative and interesting the duality of the instrumentation is. The quirky, dank, heavy electronica elements playing fiddle to the crunchy, oppressive guitars, it works incredibly well. And while I would be hard-pressed to call this a truly metal album, it certainly manages to construct a heavy enough atmosphere that wouldn't be seeming out of place in a metal album. In a lot of ways, The Architect defies classification. At times it's a bit Depeche Mode, then it's Porcupine Tree, then it's a Hans Zimmer soundtrack, then it's a pop album, then it's a rock opera. It does a remarkable job of keeping you guessing where it's going next, even though throughout the experience it remains faithful to the atmosphere it is committed to. So, what else can I say about eMolecule's The Architect? Despite any negativity I might have given over the course of this review, I keep coming back to this album. I keep having a great time with it, and every time I listen to it I find something new and exciting. be that Collins' death growls in The Turn, the catchiest chorus of the year so far with Beyond Belief, or just the sheer late 90s to early 2000s industrial KMFDM-ness of parts of nearly every track. The Architect keeps surprising me and keeps finding ways to make me overlook the grimier parts of it. Yes, I still think this could have a decent 15 to 20 minutes shaved off the runtime, and I would prefer a little bit more subtlety with the lyrical content, but there's enough going on here that more than held my attention, and I will happily say that I thoroughly enjoyed my time with The Architect. I can heartily recommend that you grab a digital copy of this one, as it really is certainly worth owning for yourself rather than just streaming it, you know. This, guys, as you well know at this point, is just my opinion, so if you have listened to this one, tell me what you thought of it in the comments down below. If there's anything else that's come out this year that you've listened to, you think I should check out, please let me know about it. I might get around to giving it my own thoughts. If you like this video, please do share it with anyone who you think might enjoy it, and do please consider subscribing for some more content. If you really like what I do, please also do consider clicking my Ko-fi link in the description box below to help support the channel. Until next time, guys, keep your rhyme signatures odd.